Right. I need to send a request to share. I haven't used Zoom in ages. It's really odd when you return to it like the first time in a while. Right.
Okay.
Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Lovely. Yeah. So I'm out of I'm visiting family for Easter, so I'm not actually in the flat. So I can't actually. Oh wait, this isn't going to work. So I'm doing the. You'll be able to see yourselves. One second. There we go. You see that? Okay.
Not
Black
yet.
screen on my.
Oh,
There
yeah.
we go.
Yes.
Cool. And it hasn't got your faces in the side.
No, I think the faces on the side are our own. Our own
That
little
Oh,
that's
window.
fine
that's
as
that's
well.
just Zoom. That's fine.
Yeah, that's
That,
fine.
that's
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, I've got quite a. I don't know if I've spoken too much about this before, but I use quite a small kit. I normally usually brew batches now of like 10 litre. And I sort of started with one of those, I don't know if anyone's seen this, like Brooklyn Brew Shop, like 4 litre kits from like Amazon in the pandemic. And I've never really scaled up beyond kind of 10 liters, been like my sort of max, but because we've moved around to like 3 different flats since I started homebrewing. So I try and have like quite a portable kit for whenever we do have to move or if I do flats. So yeah, so my kit kind of revolves around these sort of 3 pans. One's a 12 litre, one's a 6, and one's kind of a 4. And I kind of because they're not like I got these on eBay. They're not particularly expensive, but they do the job. And yeah, they've been. I've only ever really ever since the first two were the small ones that I bought, and then I scaled up to a big pan later on, and it's kind of done the trick. I wouldn't go any bigger than this at home at the moment because it's on because I'm using a hob. It just particularly like electric, it's not super consistent. It takes a long time already to get it up to temperature. So yeah, I've kind of kept it at the 10 litre batches. And then also I used to use like a broom bag kind of systems with like big sort of mesh sort of sacks, but I kind of moved away from that and started using just sort of like two different sieves to kind of filter my mash. It just seemed to be a lot more efficient and also saved a lot of cleaning with like the broom the bags. So I was just getting a better sort of gravity reading from using those. But yeah, and then I still kind of use mesh sort of. I call them mesh socks, but there's probably a better word for these. But I use these for my sort of pop editions, and I've recently invested in this kind of stainless steel drill bit, which has really helped with mashes. Like I've now got getting a far better result using that as opposed to just using like a wooden spoon. So yeah, that's kind of been my latest investment in the kit. I'm using a big plastic 12 litre bucket fermenter for most of my like primary fermentations. And beforehand, I had like these two small 5 litre buckets, which were great, but I'd used them so much. And I originally did start using like a glass demijohn, but I then have now returned to them for like aging beers. Because sometimes I'll do like little Brett things or aged sort of like projects, and yeah, they obviously are far less permeable to oxygen, so they come out a bit better from that. But yeah, this big bucket, when I say big bucket, this 12 litre bucket has been pretty great. Yeah, and it's doing the job pretty well. But the good thing is that most of my kit kind of folds into it, or like I can stack all the pots in a way where everything can kind of rush and goal itself, so I can kind of take up less space when I'm storing everything. I kind of use like a mixture of brown bottles and green bottles to kind of separate, like when I'm doing a saison or like a mixed firm beer from a clean beer. So that's normally my sort of division there. I'm also using carbonation drops. The Mango Jack ones have been like the most sort of consistent I found, so I've kind of stuck with those. And then for like my bottling equipment, I'm generally using champagne bottles a lot of the time for like saisons and things because they hold a lot more pressure. So I've got a bigger 29 millimeter capper for that, and then also a 26 one as well. And I've recently also got a pH meter, which has been quite helpful as well when I'm trying to sort of, if I'm using Brett or anything to try and sour a beer or other sort of like yeast strains and stuff. So that's been pretty good. And then I kind of have a clean and mixed firm set of like bottling equipment just to sort of prevent any sort of like mishaps there, which has kind of worked so far. If there are any infections, they're generally going to be probably from the actual fermentation. So I've kind of yeah, that's kind of worked.
I didn't
Uh,
I didn't realize you could get a 29 ml kappa with the bigger
oh yeah,
for the bigger bottles. I didn't.
yeah, no. As soon as I saw that, I think I saw somebody was using one online in like just a very old YouTube video, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to see if I can get hold of these. And yeah, they're pretty. Technically, this one actually does both, but I always keep it on the 29 one and then have because I'm normally doing like a whole mixture of bottles, and I don't really want to have to change on the fly because I already had the 26 millimeter kappa. I've just kind of
Mm.
just I get them both, and I could technically get rid of the small one here, but it's been so useful and it speeds up the whole day. So
Obviously,
especially
it holds the pressure because the bottles are thicker. But
yeah, so I've not
I
really had
just always assumed you had to put a cork and a cage on them on
no. I mean, I had
the super carbonated ones.
it was the
Boxing.
only thing that made me start using the sort of green bottles was actually could actually cap them. The cork casing I've always like whilst it looks quite cool, I always just thought it's a bit of a faff at home to try and do. And whilst I'd quite like to like double cork them if I wanted to make it look a bit fancier, a crown cap seems to do quite well with these sort of high pressure beers. So I've not really had an issue with any sort of like well, I say not overcarbonation, but like
Yeah.
bottle bomb. So yeah,
Oh,
and I'm trying to move away from flip caps. So I've tried to get back into using these kind of brown German style lager bottles because they've usually got quite a good weight to them over these sort of flip cap ones that I've collected over time. Again, not really had a bottle bomb from them, but they do seem to. I'm worried that they will get so old that maybe that's where I'm going to have some kind of contamination issue with like the seals because they aren't changeable on these ones. So, I mean, I guess I could change the whole capping system on the top, but I think for now, just for the sake of ease, I'm going to sort of go back to using sort of crown cap bottles because, yeah, I think that these ones, I particularly like the shape. I think they just look nice. It's just an aesthetic thing. Um,
oh,
but
good.
yeah, so that's kind of my system for that. Then in terms of like cleaning, I'm using Chemsan pretty much for everything as you would with like Star Sand and stuff. And I've also got recently I say recently, probably in the last year, started using probably a year or two, sterilizing stuff for like actually like deep cleaning stuff to ensure that I've actually got make sure my equipment kind of lasts. Because I think as I was saying with those two smaller buckets I was using in the past, the 5 litre ones, I think they were just prone to sort of building up. Obviously being plastic, maybe not feeling as clean as I'd like them. So I think now that I've kind of invested into having a proper sort of system and cleaning process, everything's kind of been a lot better. And then also I've got this sort of demi-john brush, which was probably the only specific thing I bought for demi-johns, but it seems to do a good job. So I like that. And this kind of like I try to use some sort of a bit of a diagram here of how generally I'm working with like the hob and things. So yeah, this is more for troubleshooting than it is. Like I by no means have a perfect system at all, but it's the system that kind of works in the space that I've got, and it does seem to produce beer, so that's quite nice. But generally, I'm using yeah, heating my mash water, adding my grist on the stove. Sometimes I'll use the oven to hold the temperature, but I find with this sort of big 12 litre pot, I've not really needed that. And then after my sort of mash, my sparge kind of it goes into the fermenter because it seems to be able to take the sort of heat a fair bit through the colander and then through a sieve through the tap of the fermenter into my two little pots where I will split the batch for the boil. This saves me on like energy because it's easier to heat these two small pots as it is. It takes ages to heat this big one once the beer has been sparged. So that's kind of been quite a good development. But the problem I found with it, and this was particularly an issue with the cream ale I made recently, is that rate of boil off to like a 30 seconds boil evaporated a lot of liquid. So I had far less beer and overshot my gravity. So I think it's something I need to dial in a bit more. But it has helped me have like quite a good extraction as well. So I've just need to do a little bit more tinkering with that whilst I continue with this. But yeah, that's generally the mash and sparge. Boils, yeah, normally I'm what's it called, hopping one portion of it, and it's probably normally the bigger portion. And that just goes in one of those mesh socks and sits on there. I also add a bit of yeast nutrient, but I usually add that to the smaller batch just to kind of more for like a sake of consistency of adding something to each one. And then I'm cooling in the sink with like the big pot once it's been cleaned and returned to the workflow into a sink filled with cold water. And then I'm normally diluting my wort with cool mineral water that's been in the fridge to kind of save up on time of cooling. But this does mean I need to kind of calibrate my recipes. So there's always this inclusion of an extra bit of water. So it's like being diluted. Again, this was kind of a bit of an issue recently with my cream ale where the amount that I was adding wasn't enough to really get the volume back to where it needed to be. So I ended up with an imperial cream ale instead of a regular cream ale. Yeah, and then normally in doing this, I managed to get my what's called temperature down pretty quickly. Considering the batches are quite small, that helps a lot. But sometimes I do have to let them cool, not overnight, but maybe for like an hour or so. And then once I'm pretty sure that I've got a consistent room temperature level, I'll pitch my yeast. Sometimes I found that that can be my this sort of last hurdle of waiting can be the big thing that can change a beer. So if I am patient, I do get my temperature right, I have a much better chance of having a better beer than if I am too eager and have the yeast a little bit hot. Because I'm always fermenting at room temperature, and that higher temperature to start with will make a huge difference to the yeast health and the outcome of the beer. But I'm generally keeping my fermenter under the sink where I keep all my bottles as well, which is like my dedicated brewing space for now. And yeah, I mean it has a bit of like mixed success. Like I try and brew seasonally, so currently the temperature's been a bit warmer than I would have liked. So I've held off on brewing the barley wine I was going to make, and I will revisit that in probably we'll see what the temperature's like in October. So summer is normally like a no brew zone for me. But yeah, so or I would specifically do saisons and those kind of things. So that might be what I look at next in the coming months if the temperature is consistent. And yeah, I will then move the beer to a demijohn or two bottles, depending on what beer I'm trying to make. And yes, so beforehand, generally you're going to see me using brown bottles for all my clean beers, and then the green bottles for anything a little bit different. Uh, yeah, and this kind of just restates the fact that I have different equipment for my clean and mixed beers. I have recently started using fermented BR8, but I've been using it as not as a primary fermentation yeast, but it's like a secondary. So I'll add it because it doesn't seem to. I think it was made for bottling purposes, but I've found that it does definitely add the Brett character, but I haven't really had any sort of bottles ready to kind of drink from this. So I will keep you posted on that, but that could be a pretty good solution rather than all valve dregs, which can be a bit hit and miss. I think that's it. That's kind of the whole thing. But yeah, any kind of question for that?
So how do you bottle from the glass demijohn? Do you bottle
I
directly?
have, and I've recently got one of those sort of bigger auto siphons that can kind of, because I was using a very small, short one beforehand, and that was a nuisance to the point where I then just started using the tubing from it, and then I was using a what's it called? I had a big sort of not syringe, but yeah, like a turkey basic kind of thing, and using that to kind of draw the air out, and that didn't really work either, rather than using that in my mouth or anything. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to invest in this auto siphon because the last thing you want to do is get a beer ready to bottle and then not be able to get it into the bottle. There's nothing more frustrating than that. So yeah, and that's worked very, very well. But it seems a bit of a weird purchase just to specifically do that. And it does take that's probably the most annoying thing I have to store is this big auto siphon. It must be like a foot and a half or something like that. It's yeah, a bit of a pain, but yeah, it does work. And I'm normally using with that. Won't use a bottling one now because it's I find the flow is much harder when you've got only two hands to try and do that and pump the thing. So yeah, I will just let that flow. And that does unfortunately mean that I will lose some beer, but I'd rather do that and get something in the bottles than to have too many things to kind of handle at once. So it's fine. But generally with
Like
my
a
clean beer,
like a very thin pipe and just a direct auto siphon, no bottling wand. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, obviously, I have also I've still got the like restrictor from my very first brew kit that goes on the edge of the I can't remember if it was a clip really that will control the flow a bit. So that's been quite helpful. Um, and yeah, that didn't actually come with the tool auto siphon. I just happened to keep that from years ago, and that's been quite good. And then from the bucket, I can just attach a bottling wand straight to that, which has been pretty great. So that's made bottling really, really easy. Beforehand, when I was using demi-johns and 5 litre buckets, I was constantly using the short auto siphon. And it was just, yeah, when you're already doing everything alone, you've got all of these sort of bottles to fill. Having just like one thing easier can make just a huge difference to your day. So, yeah, enjoyed that a fair bit. I don't mind bottling so much, but it's doing my least favorite thing. But also in the future, next time we move, we're going to be moving to a place with more space, and I will be able to kind of get a better, bigger kit. So that'll be my next thing. And the first thing I'm going to look at is fermentation temperature and get like some kind of fridge system because I think that's really at the point where I am now, where it would give me the flexibility to brew all year round. But also, I can deal with everything else in terms of like using a hob and those kind of things in the long run. But actually being able to produce like a lager when I want to would be very, very nice. Because I've only had one attempt at doing it in the past, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but certainly not great when you've got an ambient temperature of like 22 degrees.
Have you had
I
any
assume.
hassle?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Have you had any hassles with your auto siphon? Because mine works okay until I've been going for a little while, and then I get lots of air going through it, and I can't see how it gets in there, but it causes all sorts of problems for me.
I find that like the first pump of it is normally so like the first half of a batch is probably pretty good, but when it starts to get to the very sort of end, and this was more of a problem when I had the short auto siphon that would kind of not even get to the bottom of like a bucket or a demijohn, because you'd then have to try and repump it once it had kind of got to an awkward angle. Yeah, then I would find that some of my bottles would taste a little bit more oxidized than others, and I would put it down to that, the fact that it had more air pumped into it at that point.
Yeah, that's what I was
Um,
worried about. But it starts off quite early. I get a good few
yeah.
bottles out, and then it's not right near the end or anything. I just can't see how that air gets in there. It's
Mm, no, I've not had
I
that,
th
but
no,
it could.
okay,
I mean, it could be, I guess, like the plastic of the auto siphon itself, I guess. But yeah, I think that they're quite weird
okay,
things. I think quite hit and
okay.
miss, and so if you
Yeah.
get a good one, it kind of
Might it
works.
be
But
getting in where the pump goes into the tube bit, where you pump the tube?
Okay.
I think it's got, I
Maybe
don't know. I
what
had one
like
of those
the
and
sorry?
uh, I had a similar problem with auto siphon that it would start sending bubbles through, yet the end was still in the beer kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of assumed it was coming from the bit where you push the pump into the top of the tube.
Right. It's
So
got like
maybe it
a
was
washer thing, maybe.
maybe it just
Yeah.
wasn't
Okay.
sealed there. It's the only thing I could.
Hmm.
That was the only other kind of point where any air I thought could get in. I mean, there might be that. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had the same, and I think that is definitely the reason because it's something to do with the pumping, and
mm,
it's towards the end of the beer always. I don't know why. What I've done is I've lifted the whole demijohn really high, and then just used the auto siphon to get the siphon going, and then sort of tape the siphon to the bottom, and you get these little it's a little clip that you sort of tighten the pipe, and then you can sort of open and use it as an open and closed.
yeah,
And
that's what I've got.
yeah, and
I've got
then so
restricted.
otherwise you need four hands, not just two.
Yeah.
Mm,
And then you could just sort of open and close it. So you just got one siphon going, and then you just need to worry about whether or not the siphon is down. But you You need to lift it quite high.
Okay.
Or you could
Thank
do it
you.
old school, which is dispense with the auto siphon and just suck
Yeah.
the end of the pipe and let it drop into the bottle.
Yeah, I've tried
Then
that
you
with
have
just
gravity.
kind of submerging the whole tube so it's
Yeah,
full, so then you don't have to use your mouth or anything. But I just wanted to use, I
true.
thought the auto siphon would save hassle, but it's just given me so much more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a weird thing where like you definitely lose the ability of like one hand, where if you were doing, as you said, using like creating some kind of suction from the other end, where you'd have that freedom of being able to kind of use two
Mm,
hands at once. So yeah, it's not perfect by any means. I've also
okay.
found with the bigger auto siphon that I'm using now, the main difference is the amount of sediment that can get through that is much greater than what the smaller one had. So my kind of like, whilst it's not huge, there's still more sediment at the bottom of my bottles now than there were before. And I mean, I'm not too worried about it. It hasn't really impacted flavor so much, but it's yeah, it's certainly not. If you want your beer to be a bit clearer, it probably will be a bit of an impact. But yeah, it's fine. I mean, yeah, I do quite like that. But yeah, again, I think I'll continue to bottle. I seem to kind of got into a good rhythm with it. The annoying thing is the amount of storage space it has for the bottles as well, which I found is a bit of a pain. Where you got like you get a huge collection of them, and then you don't have any space to actually put beer. Nah, fill 'em.
I've just bought some stackable crates. So they were pretty good from Solent Plastics because you need quite a few if you're going to make some and then you need to store all the empties as well. It's yeah.
I've always considered getting a big plastic crate, but then for me it was like, oh, that would literally be where I'd be putting my fermenter as well. So I'm like, okay, I kind of have to
Mm,
take everything out on a bottling day and then put it back full, and then close the door and hope for the best. That's kind of it. But that's why the champagne bottles have been quite helpful in that. Granted, I'm getting it from everyone else. I don't drink champagne, but I'm fortunate that I've got friends who always bring over like prosecco bottles and those kind of things, and sometimes they're pretty good in terms of weight, so I can get more beer in less space with those, which is nice.
I like the Solent crates also. Those are great.
mm.
And they have a bunch of different kinds depending upon what size bottles or if you don't want any partitions or anything like that. So those are quite handy. I was just thinking about your temperature control thing. I'm in a very similar situation in that I don't have a fridge or anything like that. But one thing I found pretty handy is an ink bird and a heating pad. And more recently, I've started using a wrapped pill to record temperature and specific gravity as a function of time. Just so, not because it changes anything, but just so I know what's actually happening. Um,
Yeah,
and I found that that's pretty effective for about 8 to 9 months a year, because I don't have any control.
yeah.
And for a couple of months in January and February, I can even, put the fermenter in a rubbish bin outside with the heating pad. And that works too if you have any
Uh,
outside space. So I'm,
I guess I will do in the future, so I'll definitely look into that because that'd be very, very cool.
I mean, there's no room for a fridge in my house at all. Um, so this is how I'm making do, but I'm finding it works pretty well, and it's not terribly expensive. Doesn't take up a lot more space other than a couple more pieces of kit.
I did consider a heating pad for a bit, but then I was like most of the time, I think I just kind of like looked away from it because I was finding it like the temperature was normally higher rather than lower. So, but that I mean, it does keep it consistent, I guess, because you could just then set at least a consistent temperature, which is far better than having no temperature or no control. So yeah, that probably was something as well to consider. I did want to get a pill because I thought that would be great in terms of actually knowing what's going on inside your fermenter. But then I was like, oh, do I really want to see that it's just going from high to low all the time? And that's why maybe some of the batches are a bit hit and miss. But no, I mean, these are all things for, I figured for when I have more space. But actually, the more I see it, the more there are like quite good sort of solutions, as well as like yeast choice, which I always seem to kind of screw up a little bit in terms of
Yeah, I use it
design.
in our kitchen, which doesn't have any heat.
Mm.
And when I'm fermenting, like the first few days of the primary, I'll kind of leave the window open most of the time. And so nobody really complains too much about it being cold in there, but it's about 16 or something like this. So I can use that as a baseline to heat things up, and that's quite handy. The second thing I would just say is that I have an ink bird and a pill, but if I was to do it again, I'd probably get the wrapped device that integrates the pill output into the power
That's
for
something.
just a few, 10 quid more or something. So I think so you can set it that when you hit a certain gravity, you should up the temperature to something.
That's really cool. That's
Yeah. So it's another level of control.
brilliant.
If you want to say drive attenuation at the end, I do it by hand, but you could automate it.
I'm gonna look into that. That's very, very cool.
I've done that method where you tape the probe of the inkbird on the side of the fermenter, and I've found because I've got one fermenter that's got what do you call it? You can measure the temperature in the inside. It's got like a probe that goes all the way to the inside, and to measure the outside versus the inside. And it seems like it's always pretty much 1 degree. You measure 1 degree warmer than what the beer, or the beer is 1 degree warmer than what you're measuring. Sorry, that way around. So you just change the temperature accordingly. Yeah. And I think especially early on in the fermentation when it's going crazy, it's exothermic. So you can probably go another degree down in the first 2, 3 days of fermentation. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where
Uh,
the wrap pill is pretty handy because you can
Yeah.
measure the temperature inside. The gravity's not so accurate, but the temperature sure is.
Yeah.
but I mean, I guess with the gravity, is accurate enough that you know when it's stopped fermenting, I guess, or when it's consistent, which is kind of really the bare minimum that you want. So that's good enough for me in terms of that. I mean, I use a refractometer again because it's less space than a what's it called what's it called now
Hydrometer.
hydrometer. That's it. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, like I got it years ago. I do occasionally calibrate it, but it's one of those sort of things where I'm sure they fall out of sync far more frequently than you'd think.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Jack?
Can
Okay.
you? I was
Oh,
just going
sorry.
to ask, could you suggest a brand for a refractometer?
I got mine on eBay before I really knew what I was buying, but I can find it. If it's, I mean, it works. I'll put it that way, but I'm sure probably someone's got a better recommendation than just an eBay find. It certainly does work though, and it's not broken on me, so that's quite
That's the
good.
main thing. That's it.
I'll
Yeah.
dig it out.
Jack, have you got a beer style that works really well with your system and one that doesn't
Uh,
work so well?
So I would go one that works well is saisons when pretty much any time of year I can get like something saison-ish out. But the problem with that is a lot of my beers then end up even the ones that aren't saison. So for instance, with the cream ale, even that was a bit saison-like in terms of yeast stress. So which is a bit annoying because it was quite good for like one of my sort of like weird ones that doesn't go the way that I wanted it to. But I still quite liked it, which was strange. But yeah, so I think that that's a style that works well for me. The one I've struggled the most with that I really like a couple of times now that I've really wanted to get down is using anything with like Philly sour. But it's so strange that it seems to really need a consistent temperature, and it also really needs to need a consistently higher temperature than room temperature, but not so high that like doing it in summer and just freeballing it works out. So yeah, to me that's been the annoying one because I'd love to make it quite easy to make sour beer, which is like a that's not too sour but also quite low effort. And it seems to be like, no, if you want to make something on a low tech kind of thing, it's going to be quite high effort. So fine.
Okay.
And obviously, I'd say a lager is obviously it's just been kind of off the table, and that's fine. Like, I mean, the one that I did make came out. It just kind of it tasted a little bit like just an over sort of stressed ale yeast. It wasn't so bad in terms of off flavors. It didn't particularly have any like sulfur or anything like that, but it just was a bit too phenolic and too estery.
Um, Maybe not equipment related, but you mentioned you add half a pack of yeast for a typical 10-liter batch.
Yes,
I'd probably say you could use a whole pack because
this was the
typically for a 1050 beer, you'd be looking at 250 billion cells.
mm,
Um, and a typical dry yeast pack is somewhere between 100 and 150. They differ quite a lot, apparently. So one pack is probably exactly what you need for a 10-liter batch. I
because
would
I
guess.
overheard somebody saying this recently, and it occurred to me that actually it's always better to overpitch than underpitch in this scenario, in
Unless
terms of
you
what the
want,
outcome would be.
yeah, unless you
So
want a really estery beer like a Hefeweizen or something. But otherwise, you're more likely to go wrong by underpitching than overpitching. Um,
yeah,
But I think a whole pack for a 10-liter batch is fine. And that could be part of the yeast stress um, you've noted.
yeah, it would certainly help with the lack of temperature control as well. So I think it's something which I just got into a groove of doing, especially when you're buying a whole pack anyway. Like it's not like I'm saving the pack to use on anything else. It's usually just
Oh,
going in the bin. And yeah, I think it probably stems from doing when I was doing 5 liter batches, and I was like, well, I definitely shouldn't be using a whole pack for this, but you probably could get away with that then. But yeah, I definitely think, particularly with this barley wine that I plan to make soon, that's certainly going to be a whole pack in that. So particularly when it's got a higher gravity, I've certainly used like a whole packs then. But I think in
I'll probably
future,
use
I'm
two
just
packs, 2 packs in a barley wine.
yeah,
I'd do two packs in a 10-liter for a barley wine. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely easy. I mean, I say
Easy.
for 1050 for dry juice, it's round about a gram a litre you want, isn't it? I think to have a real good strong fermentation.
Yeah.
I think that'll be the next change. That's a good shout.
Okay. I know we mentioned another beer break, but it's only been 40 minutes. Beer break? Anyone? Yeah, five. Des looks happy. Okay, I think we'll just pass it over to you, Arthur. Thank you very much, Jack.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks, Jack.